It's the LIA Cast, a show where a couple of visual storytellers get together, take a walk around a topic. Sometimes that topic can be quite treacherous. Sometimes it's just a little bit of a contemplative topic. Like, let's chew on it a little bit. Let's thoughtfully digest this intellectual meal. My name is Jersey Drozd, cartoonist and teaching artist. With me, the other guy is returning after a long trip.
Hey everyone, I'm Rob Stenzinger. I'm a coder and a designer. Hey Jersey, how you doing?
Hey Rob, how is your travels? How were your travels? Can you even talk about it, or is this all secret, like covert CIA travels?
It's not that covert, but it's partially, and I don't know. I'm still working on that level of my, what I share publicly thing, right?
Yeah.
There's it was an adventure for the day job, and I learned some things, and then I came home.
And some of these things, I'm sure, will filter into the Polytechnicast, that other audio journal show that you do. That's my segue into, before we get to Curveball, we've been doing this thing this month, Rob. Today was day 20 of a thing that we started at the top of November.
What have we done? Yeah, so what we've been doing is like daily audio journaling, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. Honestly, I know it took me a while to react to it when you posed it in the middle of last month.
You thought it was a brilliant idea. What do you think of it now?
Now I know it's a brilliant idea. I've crossed that threshold, and
right answer.
I can't unknow. So essentially it's the Art Sound Off challenge, where for every day in the month of November, Jersey and I challenged one another and ourselves to go out and, in our case, get our journal podcasts which already existed, get them updating every day, and see what that's like. But then invite a bunch of other people along.
And people took the bait. So, yeah, what were you say?
No, which is really cool. Obviously, it's been a lot of fun because, what essentially happens is, so if you're curious to check out what's happening, is all of us who are doing this are sharing, some daily journal recordings, doing some reflection about what we're making or some things we've been meaning to think about and talk out loud and to process, right? And we're doing that by just sharing a link on Twitter with the hashtag #ArtSoundOff. And so if you go check that out, there's like an amazing body of content out there that didn't exist on, the 31st of October.
Yep, and follow along at the Art Sound Off hashtag. And there's still time to play along if you want to join the fun, and that's at artsoundoff.com. And okay, so this is the first. This isn't Curveball, but this is something I want to throw out into the ether, and I want to see what you react to it initially, Rob. Like that text I sent you in the middle of the night when I said, "Hey, we should do a daily journal cast." I wonder if the next LIA Cast, since it will be in December, will it? Should, yeah. I wonder if the next one should be some kind of reflective episode on the journal reflections of November. Like, what did we take away? What did we learn? How are we different after we did this thing? And maybe get some feedback from the leaners who participated by way of like audio comments that we could play on the air, or maybe even having some of them on. Some kind of, because this is something I get really fired up about when I'm teaching. Is I like to have an event that has some closure where everybody gets to own what they did and own the experience and sort of reshare the experience back to the group so that everybody sort of looks at it afresh, right? It's not just going like, that was cool.
Well, exactly, which is easy to do when you've added a thing on top of your normal routine, and then it's kind of it's a relief when you have that space back in a way. I know I'll miss it, but at the same time, it's really worth at least taking one more breath, looking back at what happened. I'm totally sold. Like let's make that the topic of the next Lean Into Artcast. We just need to figure out the details, right?
Yeah, which won't be difficult to do. We'll figure that out. Okay, but so that's out there, artsoundoff.com. If people want to go check that out, you can stop the recording or stop the podcast now if you're listening to it after the fact, and go check out some of those micro journal casts. And there's some really terrific food for thought in there. And great hearing cartoonists and visual voices to put with the names, with the tags or the usernames. Anyway, we start the show every time with this thing called the curveball, which is an intellectual warm-up exercise where it's a question that's not meant to have any kind of like just do this answer or this is the right way or the wrong way to do it. It's more like, hey, here's a difficult thing that we wrestle with. Let's see if we can take these puzzle pieces and put them together into some kind of shape of a thing. And the topic of this episode is going to be collaboration based on a talk that you did, Rob, at Agile Day.
Yeah.
You did this talk. You chronicled it in your journal microcast, the Polytechnicast. People can go check it out. It went well, right?
I think it did. A few different indicators I use to make those observations is, in the moment, I like to notice if people are, buried into their computers or notes or smartphones or whatever. Are they checking out the slides? Are they looking at me? Are they reacting? Are they laughing? Are they asking questions? And then when I ask them questions, are they interacting, and to what depth, and all that, right? So during the talk, I felt there was good participation, and then afterward, I like two forms afterward. I really like to do a feedback survey afterward, but I that's my fault. I didn't finish preparing that. But I do like to notice if people just have some thoughts or ideas they want to bounce off me and say, hey, how's it going? And or boy, there's this one point, and I think that's going to be really hard to do, and here's why, or whatever, right? Some talk afterward, and all the above happened, except that survey. Yeah.
We haven't run surveys on the Lena to Art site in a while. I wonder if we should bring those back. I'm just thinking aloud. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Curveball. Wherever you are in your creative journey, career, hobby, whatever, at some point, you are going to want to go out and engage with the larger community of people in that field, right? Am I wrong in guessing that's what inspired you to go do the Agile Day talk, or led you to the Agile Day talk? Because, I mean, there were a variety of forces at work there, but part of it came out of the fact that you wanted to be of service to that community, yes?
Yeah, those exact words. Yeah, I want to be of service to that community.
Okay.
Yep.
So I think it's safe to assume that many other visual storytellers feel the same way. You're engaged with a thing, you're learning about a thing, it's delighting you, it's challenging you, it's making you sad, it's making you happy, and you wish you could share those experiences or get other experiences from other people in that community. So the question is like, we've all been to comic conventions or whatever convention, right? Whatever kind of art convention, and you see all these people who, like, maybe you've talked with online, maybe you've like followed them online, you've read their blog, and you're like, oh, that's that person who said really neat things that I've had the experience where I've rode an elevator with, like, oh, I read this guy's blog, he writes really good stuff. How do I start a conversation here, right? But beyond that, not talking about the social component, because that's a tricky beast in and of itself. How did you know, Rob, when you were ready to start submitting talks as a way to engage the community? Because I'm thinking about the person who's like, boy, I'd really like to do a panel at a comic convention, or maybe lead a workshop at this conference, or propose a workshop for this conference. How did you know that you were ready to commit to that and offer that as a service? What was your state before? And what was your state after when you said, okay, now it's time to submit this thing?
Those are really good ways to frame it up, and it's varied based on different events, because I have, for a few years now, been submitting talks to different events, and some events I've been able to speak at, and that's worked out, and other events it hasn't. Some events I've been invited. So being invited is, I think, the wonderfully convenient, super obvious one.
Wait until somebody asks you.
And that one is my favorite.
That one is nice. It really does take the edge off the anxiety of doing public speaking when they want you to be there, right?
At least that first phase, because then it's the, oh boy, then putting together the thing that you want to live up to what you've committed and what you want to offer to that community. Yeah. Oh boy. And so before that, I think it's a matter of this reminds me a little bit of our creative voice topic, and I think it's something that, as you practice any kind of reflection or journaling or chronicling of some of your journey, you've got your progress, and then if you have stories to tell, you notice that you're sharing those experiences. There's likely at any time right in there, you're ready, because there's someone who is at a similar point in their journey, or just before it, or just after it, where they're going to be curious to hear about someone else's perspective that they can relate to. So likely when you start to say things and are capturing them, or it's almost like you're ready to raise your hand in class, and it's not a fearful moment.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it, because that is different. Like when you're in 9th grade, 10th grade, whatever, and it's like the first week of school and the teacher's asking questions, that's when you're like this. You're crossing your arms, you're leaning back like, not me. I'm not putting my voice into this mix. But then like a semester in, and you've read a bunch of stuff, and you've done a few papers and stuff, and suddenly it's like, oh, I got something to say about this. Yeah, that's like when the change happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a good rule of thumb. It's like if you can remember what that feeling was like when you actually felt like you could contribute. Well, what about the person who's like just, there's probably kids who never participated in class, though. So I don't know if that would work for them necessarily.
Well, it can start from a one-on-one standpoint, where you notice you have something to offer someone else, and they just seem to appreciate that exchange, where just one-on-one, if someone's like, hey, how'd you do that? And you convey how you did it, and they like it.
So similar to who wrote this? Somebody tweeted this recently. They said like, how do I know when to print books? And then the person said, when people ask you, where can I buy your book? So when people start asking, how did you do that? That's like the first little bit of evidence to suggest that maybe you have something to contribute to this.
Yeah, I think it is. I think when people will be reacting to you in one way, shape, or form. If you're saying things that become a interesting point of exploration in a conversation, and that gets captured or becomes a focal point, you notice that, oh, I am a contributor in this circumstance. And that could just be the start. Maybe you're not quite ready then, but it's worth noticing when you're contributing something that is getting used. And then if someone's asking for more of it, and then at what scale are they asking for more of it? Because it eventually getting invited to, maybe consult on the topic, or you're getting paid to do the thing, that's certainly a clear indication as well. But I think you were more talking about the sort of the public venue sharing of stuff, right?
Yeah. Like when did you know, like basically, and we've already kind of walked around this, but just to kind of cap it off, is the basic idea is like, when do you know that you're ready to step forward into a community unasked and offer something to them, right? And part of the evidence is when somebody asks, not for you to step forward and do public speaking, but asks your opinion, asks for your insight, asks for your process, asks for some kind of elaboration on something you've previously contributed. Does that sound right?
I think that's right. And I just want to point out is that sometimes when we label a community as all one, it's really not. There's like a lot of local branches and different groups and whatnot that make that up. So you may connect really well with one group in a different location versus another, right? And so these different communities have some thematic relation, but inherently they're in they really are different communities. So it makes sense that when you when you feel ready, you don't have to be invited. It makes sense to reach out, and to reach out more than once to get that sort of extra feedback and impression to figure out like, oh, okay, a point that you may think is super fascinating may not be quite the angle that community's seeking,
Yeah. And that's not a personal thing, right?
Mm.
Or, well, at least it shouldn't be. Some people might make it so, but it's something I try not to take personally.
Yeah.
This just comes from my teaching experiences. Like I've had, when you're teaching teenagers, they make no mistakes about unplugging from what you're doing. And when they unplug, that's time for me to say, oh, is this not for you? Time to go someplace else. Because I am here to serve you guys and to educate you guys, and not to yell at you for not loving sound design the way I do,
Exactly. Yeah, and it's worth. It's another piece of information. That's all. I mean, I have received plenty of rejection, and
as have I.
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's helped me reformulate. I've shelved certain topics, and I thought, I don't. Maybe that doesn't have a place right now, and that's all right.
Yep. Or maybe that's not the venue either, right? I've had paying gigs where I've been flown to do a thing, and then they're like, "Oh, that was terrific. You want to do another one?" And then I turn in a proposal for another one, and I'm like, "Nah, not for us. Never mind." So it's like, okay, that topic or that venue or whatever. There's a lot of factors that can figure into that, and that's worth listening to and paying attention to. I think we did that one, Rob. I think we walked around that curveball, don't you?
Oh yeah.
You want to get to the general topic then? Because we're going to forego the 10,000 feet up and on the ground thing, because I was really eager to just get you to walk through your talk that you did at Agile Day, which is entitled, what was the title of this thing again? It had a...
It's better handoffs and team cohesion across software disciplines.
Oh, no. What's this got to do with visual storytelling? Nothing, that's what. No,
nope.
It has...
Show's over. Psych. No, it's
yeah, whatever. Yeah.
No, I mean, here's the thing: when you give a talk, is that you may have like a core heart of a topic, and then finding ways for that to relate to a given audience. You may get bridge to it, like refining the title or how you frame things. The framing helps make it put it in context for that given community. But I'm glad you brought this up, because I didn't want it to seem lazy that for our own podcast I didn't do that sort of reframing, and it's just been busy.
Oh yeah, no, and that's what I'm here for, is to help with the reframing. Otherwise, all we'd have to do is just turn on the camera and let you go. I would be superfluous. But yeah, I mean, like, as I was fortunate in that I got to see some of the early drafts of the talk and then the final slide deck, and you walked through it with me before you did the talk. And as I'm watching this, I'm like, this is not just about software. This is about collaborating anywhere. This is like collaborating with clients as a freelance illustrator, as a designer, as anybody who's doing any, like, storyboard artist. This is about working with collaborative partners on a graphic novel or a comic book or a web comic or an animated feature. This is the heart of this thing. Really feels like this is about learning how to collaborate effectively with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the heart of it. And you were saying?
Well, I was going to ask if you wanted to just dive into it.
Yeah, let's dive in.
All right, cool. Well, while you pull up the deck, I will say that as a tease for this, for people to like stick around, because like, collaboration, I'm not going to do that anytime soon. One of the things that I think is a great headline for this is, one of the points that this talk makes is that empathy and scientific evidence gathering is not only a good thing to do, like it's just right, it's like just and kind, and it's being a good human being, but it's also like the most efficient way to get things done. I think that's the thing to brace yourself for as we walk through this, Rob. So I'll hand it off to you to start with. All
right. Well, this is and this is kind of a fun way. This reminds me of how we performed things back in the 30 classes in 30 days. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so Jersey's here. He is the voice of the audience, and obviously the co-host of this thing, and so we're going through it together. But yeah, obviously I'll be the main narrator to get through this body of content, and hopefully have shared enough disclaimer as far as the software angle, and so that's going to come up a bit, but again, it's about more than that. And so yeah, what we're here to talk about is essentially. Yeah, it's called Better Handoffs and Team Cohesion Across Software Disciplines. And essentially, it's a way to explore three main topics or techniques and habits, such as gathering evidence and understanding our biases and seeking and giving critique. Normally, at this point, I think a lot of you in the audience probably know a bit about my background, but just in case you don't know where I come from, I started this serious path on creating interactive things and visual storytelling and stuff with game design that eventually led to web design, and then being like a corporate software engineer and architect and doing user experience eventually, and focused on that. And anyway, that's like my a lot of the paid professional past stuff. But I also do lots of other things, such as, well, this podcast, the video game Guitar Fretter, the book Underwater Tomato Ninja, game construction kit, and of course, I've got a role right now doing some that kind of embraces a lot of my professional past and current stuff I do, which is I'm part of an applied research team at Target and Target Corporate. And so, just to throw this out there too, my opinions are my own. There you go. But in a nutshell, I design, code, draw, and teach, which means that I've lived at the boundary between the disciplines a lot, because I relate to a lot of the disciplines. And I tend to enjoy advocacy across the different disciplines and combining them. And so, just to mention Agile and what that whole thing's about is, in a way, Agile's a movement to get people to collaborate in a very human and accountable fashion, compared to trying to dehumanize the process of building stuff like software. And not to vilify other approaches, but like other approaches embrace more of a factory mental model of how things are thought of, and then they're approved, and then they are budgeted, and then they are built, and then then they're designed, and then they're built, and then they're like in this literal sequence, as if you're picturing an automobile being assembled down something that was conceptually designed in the 1800s, and yeah, it has a lot of great uses. Factories are amazing, yet they leave a lot to be desired when you take that approach with software. So anyway, that's the whole Agile movement. Even in that world, and you're being very, it's assumed that you're going to be collaborative. You have these specialties that you still end up having to deal with, like handoffs. And to
if I could jump in there, just
Yeah.
like to sort of advocate for the audience who's come into this thing, because what I bring to it is the viewpoint of the specifically like guy who's fascinated by comics. Is I was looking at this particular part of the talk, is different disciplines, assembly line. This exists in comics history as well, with penciler, inker, letterer, colorist, and when I've worked in environments where it's like, here's the pencils, ink them, you got a week to do it. Oh, well, but this needs tweaking, that needs tweaking, or this isn't clear to me, that isn't clear to me. That's your problem. It's in your hands now. You have that part of the process. Deal with it. You got your time budget, you got your money budget. Make it happen. And these handoffs, these handoff friction points happen within, I think, any industry where you have multiple disciplines at work, and comics is one of those ones.
And I do think that this isn't to vilify handoffs. That's a super good point too, because it can be natural that of course we have different disciplines and different specialties, and we're just trying to be in service to one another and to some overall project, right?
Oh yeah,
That
like yeah, the and again, not to vilify, but I remember it's something I heard a lot when I was working in graphic design was work your magic.
mm,
Here's the thing, work your magic on it, make it happen. I don't care whatever kinds of things, resources you need or information you need. I am done with this, and now it's time for you to do the thing that I don't understand in order to make it into what I want it to be.
which I think there's an element of that, and so you actually do run into a lot of this kind of reflection and philosophy in like different work that Mike Montiero puts out. So his book Design is a Job, his book that I haven't finished yet, but it's the You're My Favorite Client, his recent one, and of course this podcast Let's Make Mistakes, and that's when someone has that feeling, that is an opportunity to be like, well, I like doing that, and so great, hire me to do that, and I totally understand it, and I'll try to make it relate to you. And yet, there is basically, so in some ways we're creating a framing of how the extremes in that relationship could be probably detrimental to what you're trying to build together. But the normal situation is that you do need to hand things off sometimes. Someone has money, they want you to come in and solve a thing, or you're working with other people to solve different parts of the thing, and so it's natural to be needing the handoff, and that is a I think you can characterize those handoffs at like at stages of creative progression, and also at the disciplines of the boundaries. Because of course, if you're going from pencil to inker in comics, yep, that's a natural handoff across boundaries. But also, in a way, it's saying that this thing that we're making together is at that stage where the next point of embellishment needs to occur, or whatever.
Yes and no. I mean, because one of the things that we did with the Warren Commission report, and I know I've said this on the show before, is that none of those pages were in like various stages of completion where part of it's penciled, part of it's inked, part of it's balloon spotted, part of it's colored. And so it one of the things I appreciated about that gig is that the pages kind of went in this circular path, kind of what you've got in this slide here, where it's like you've got a forward direction and a backward direction. It's not a linear progression. It's like looping around all these different stages of development of the idea rather than a linear path, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's important that the nonlinear is the truth of the matter. And a lot of times we like to oversimplify and set things into the imagined summary of the progress, which is we finished a thing at one stage and now it moves on to the next stage. And the truth of it is like it goes back and forth until it's it eventually does cross a threshold, but like you're not necessarily only working for that. And in software, a lot of times there's depending on the organization, those thresholds are very hard and fast, and it's very much like it goes from one department to the next.
Yeah,
depending on the organization.
Yep, I've had it depending on the particular gig and the particular publisher, the particular client. I've had it, sometimes it can go back and forth for a long time. Other times, it's really like, no, you're done with this now. Time's up. Let's move on. So hand it to the next person, kind of thing.
Yep. And overall, I mean, that's where we have like we work out. We have our agreements with those that we're collaborating with, and or we have the formalities of our different roles, or we have methodologies, right? Because in a way, like what you described, Jersey, I don't know, does that really have like a really popular term, that sort of common comics progression that goes from
writer, penciler, inker, letter, colorist.
Exactly. Yeah.
I've heard it called assembly line style comics. I mean, that's the only term I've ever heard for that.
That makes a lot of sense. And if that were in software, guaranteed there'd be the assembly line comics methodology, and there'd be books and generations of people who have all consulted, talking about it. And but yeah, I mean, that is a fairly formal thing, and that's like, well, so if we have that formal thing, then everyone knows what's going on. We're playing the same game, and it's no big deal. One could assume. But I don't think that's the case, and it's really easy to end up in the situation where one collaborator, maybe occupying a certain specialty, is not necessarily taking another collaborator's constraints into account. Yep. And yeah, so let's say like on a comics page, a constraint would be maybe.
I've got some real world examples from my own personal experience.
Fire it off.
Penciler doesn't leave room for word balloons on the page, right? When the penciler went in there, they had the script, but they didn't do balloon spotting ahead of time. And so they fill the page with a lot of crucial visual information. When the letterer gets it, they go, where am I supposed to put the balloons on this, right? Or the inker or colorist gets the pages late in the game and has to rush what was a very detailed page, right? It's like, oh, the penciler kind of they went over their time budget, and now you get to make up the difference. We've all experienced that in whatever job we've had, where we're the last person in the supply chain, and we got to pick up the pace to make up for delays elsewhere, right? Or
well,
go ahead.
Well, question. So you're mentioning picking up the pace, but have you ever had to like redo something where it's like kind of forcing it out, but then
back before the internet, when I was early in my career, I mailed pages to an inker. And then the inker had to call me on the phone and say, I spilled ink all over the page.
Ooh.
Can you repencil and overnight it to me?
Yeah.
He was contrite, and but yes, I've had that experience where something happens late in the supply chain, or something gets destroyed or lost, and you have to remake it from scratch. I've had files get corrupted and remake it from scratch. Yes, that has happened. And then another real-world example is when a writer asks for more than the artist can deliver in one page. Panel 1, kid leaps into the air, spins around 3 times, throws fireballs out of his hands, lands on the top of a car, punches another guy in the face. Here's 45 word balloons that go in this panel 2. Right?
Yeah.
And that's an old joke amongst comics artists, but that happens. And then you got to go back to the writer and say, okay, now let's look at what really needs to happen here. If you can have that conversation, sometimes they're not like if the team dynamic isn't there, communication can be a problem, and sitting down to have that discussion can be an issue. So yeah,
it's and that is something that maybe we could, as we continue to explore, right? Because that is definitely an open issue. It's where how do you approach this when it doesn't seem as safe, and then that is an ongoing thing I'm trying to explore and add to this, and because I think essentially the framing is a big deal, and so if you have one collaborator that is able to notice the different perspectives and quirks of the other collaborators, you can start to compensate and whatnot. But even though the roles can be clear, it's like understanding the intent of how that other person sees their role and how it contributes to the overall picture. It seems to have a significant effect.
So intent as to what they want out of the project, what they want out of the collaboration, and whether or not everybody's intent is cohesive in terms of what the thing that will be rendered through the collaboration.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And I'm sort of building toward the idea that it's our disciplines can cloud us as much as they help us get a thing done. And it's whether it's the timing or the how things get done or the way it's presented, or maybe it's the expectations of, well, maybe you should let's see. Gosh, I'm trying to think. So physical world things, there are precautions and like there are ways to protect, because I'm thinking of your spilled ink example. Mm-hmm. And it's like, what could that person have done? So that's really sort of a workspace discipline thing more than I don't know what you could have done necessarily there. But
Or, well, also, like in the case of when the writer asks for things that the penciler doesn't know how to achieve, like the laundry list or the shopping list is too big for what the artist thinks they can pull off, um, without, like, so that your slide says it's easy not to be on the same page, just without opening up a line of dialogue and finding a way to compromise on these things together. It could easily turn into of one of those situations where you say, "Oh, can you believe these writers? They don't know what the heck goes into my job. My job is the most important job in the supply chain, after all, and these guys make it difficult for me." Or the writer could be saying, "Boy, will you look at this penciler who just doesn't seem to get the genius that I'm putting into this thing, and why don't they have the vision that I have on this thing, after all?" Right? So, like, to have a closed view of what your role is in the supply chain or the system, whatever you want to call it. Bullpen style, Shadowing Tronics is throwing into the chat room. That's what the Marvel style was called.
Okay.
It's easy to not be on the same page and get sort of a myopic view of how to fix these things.
Exactly, and that's where valuing our disciplines over the overall shared creative process. That's where we can fall into traps, and I think the traps are there in some ways because of the specialization, and your specialization means you're building up a skill with a specific set of tools and language and methods, and in some ways, like, collaborations become like their own model UN experiments, and you're just sharing an artifact from an alien artifact from one culture to another that doesn't necessarily, relate to them implicitly. And you may not know where it fails and where it succeeds. Such as, a writer which is, it's. Let's see. How could so any role, like, so the writer could be over embellishing in their role, the penciler could be over embellishing in their role, the inker could possibly be, I'm guessing, obfuscating details.
Yep.
When it's not necessarily part of the goal.
Adding detail that will be lost when the thing comes out in print, right? Like, I'm going to put all this, I'm going to spend 6 hours on this cross hatching back here. Well, that's just going to turn to mud when we actually put it on paper. So why are you slowing things down by doing that, right?
Yep. And
it's
like isolation across the different cultures.
Yes. Thank you. That's a great way to put it.
And one way to characterize that isolation and try to, get a different framing and get a different reference on it is, I think of pure research versus applied research, and how that, if you just swap out research with the word discipline. So if you're just purely about a discipline, you could easily define success as, like, the ultimate form of cross-hatching. And perhaps you are measurably achieving results toward the ultimate form of cross-hatching. Yet, when you apply it in context, right, and you're doing a mashup across disciplines where the whole point of the project isn't just within the one discipline, the definition of success changes and becomes something shared that's across them, and likely is probably nothing really to do with the pure discipline. It's more incidental, because it's like a value you can derive from the discipline, such as you want to learn something or teach something, or even more likely, generate income. So let's see. Pretty much with no segue whatsoever.
We get to a slide that says, which one of these is Columbo? And I'm only saying this for the people who are listening to just the audio version. And I see what is clearly a Terminator standing on a pile of skulls. I see a man in a trench coat with a notebook and a pencil and a fedora. And then I see, wait a minute, who is this on the far right, Rob?
That's the doodle of Dirty Harry.
Yeah, 357 Magnum, yes. And you got the snarling lip. So which one of these is Columbo? I'm guessing it's the one in the middle.
Yeah. Exactly. I also don't have my slide build-ups in this performance of it. So yeah. So we see the Columbo's the only one not X'd out. And so Jersey. So what are some things that you do you recall the character Columbo?
I do recall the character Columbo.
What are some things that Columbo does?
He stoops. He is not an imposing figure. He is often looking very disheveled. He smiles a lot. He's a very sort of agreeable human being, and he doesn't raise his voice often. He's a very gentle guy as well. And I do know that he always ends every episode with, "Oh, one more question." And that one more question is usually a linchpin to getting the confession out of the bad guy in the story.
And what's funny is I bet you would have, without even jumping into this topic and preparing for this episode, this is just stuff that you recall.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and some of these things, I mean, it seems what's interesting, as I noticed, that people of a variety of ages remember this character in some way, Columbo. It's not too far out of our consciousness. And, I mean, he's a character in a story. He's a detective, right? And, like main characters often possess, he has immense skill when it comes to investigation, and he's super observant, and he has the qualities that you described as well, right? He's not, I put the Terminator out there because like how he relates to his goals is way not like a Terminator. It's not like pursuing a mission unquestioningly, and he doesn't pursue his goals like a Dirty Harry either, because Dirty Harry is passing extreme judgment. And so in a nutshell, I actually like your summary too here, and I provide this for others who haven't who don't recall like all the gist of Columbo. It actually started a genre called How Catch 'Em instead of Who Done It, and it flipped Who Done It on its head, because in the first act we see the crime be committed. We see the motivation for the crime often too, where there's someone, like a business partner and another business partner are lovers, but there's some little bit of weird tension there. But then the tension gets really bad when they, the one notices that the other partner's cheating, and there's no forgiveness of that, and they deal with that in a very harsh manner. That in the second act, Columbo needs to discover exactly how it happened and whatnot, and so it's funny. He comes in later. It's the whole story is about Columbo. He's not there right away. We know what happened. We just don't know how he's gonna, pull this off this time. And like any plot, the stakes get higher as he continues to investigate in his style, which at no point does it's not like we're waiting for Columbo to become that sprung trap and lose his mind, and go guns a-blazing. He's doing it his way, his style the whole way, very very approachable and questioning, until ultimately bad guy confesses because of Columbo's perfect reasoning, or imperfect but hard to escape reasoning. What's more important, what all that is, I mean, that the sort of the framework of what a Columbo plot is. And him as a character, he really, to me, is like this mental model of like just investigating with a lot of empathy. He has the quality of being super observant, which is critical to investigating. Yet, if he's super observant, yet a force of nature that is rough and difficult to relate to, he's not going to get all the information. So he's also a very, very approachable interviewer.
Okay, so he does not put his interviewees on the defensive in an aggressive way, right? He makes it their choice to be on the defensive or not, right?
Yes. It's you could debate that a bit by his final trap of logic, and as he outlines his case toward the end, where the bad guy realizes that I have no chance. None. It's very I don't know, it's approachable. Mm-hmm. And if you take that approachable nature to like the creative process, and think about what happens as you progress. And let's think of our example. Like, you mentioned Jersey, and Shadow Wingtronics, the essentially the bullpen method of producing comics. What would Columbo do as things are breaking down or not, right? I mean, I think first he would notice, is this handoff working? Is the work progressing well? And if it's not, then you start looking for why or why not. And nothing really complicated to point out here other than I think every individual, and not, jump to assumptions as far as, well, maybe things are breaking down at the coloring stage, but then the fundamental issue happened at the writing stage. And so Columbo is going to interview everyone along the way and form that picture and gather evidence to and then examine the evidence and see what holds up. And what struck me in thinking of Columbo as this mental model of investigative, approachable problem solving is that he is so extremely collaborative that, he'll work with anyone to solve anything. Ultimately, he's working with a murderer to understand the full situation surrounding a crime, and that he's so good at collaborating that even that murderer collaborates with him. Yeah, I know that's a story, but I still think it's a handy mental model to unbox, to examine, why does it seem plausible? Why does it work that way? And by all means, jump in anytime here.
Yeah.
And that's so here you go. This is the thesis that if any of us in our collaborations, if we are questioning and curious, and we do this with empathy, and as we're doing that, we're looking for evidence to help inform our choices, we will have better handoffs, better collaborations.
This is where we get back to my tease. This is the part of the talk that just really impressed me, because basically what you're saying is by being a compassionate and curious, questioning person, you'll have better work relationships and make better stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's funny because efficiency usually is framed up as, well, you sacrifice a few things in the name of efficiency. People are a little less happy, but hey, the trains run on time. That old joke, right? That's the way efficiency is always framed up. I rarely see it framed up as, hey, guess what? If you are just a pro-social human being, life will work better. Work will work better for you.
That is funny. I like that. I like that interpretation because, yeah, a lot of times we're adjusting our process based on something we're measuring, and it's like, well, I'll make more money on this gig if I put less ink on the page because, now I've saved 5 cents per page, times how many pages times whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And now I've quantified, operational efficiency, without maybe questioning where, what else was lost at that. And or at the very least, casting a wider net as far as how could this work better.
But okay, so you giving me the recipe, Rob. We're done here. All I got to do is go out and be a nice guy, right? It's that easy.
Show over. Or if honestly, yes. And I put this in here because I'm I don't want people to feel trapped in this talk. If you're okay, now I'm good. Totally cool. But I do have more to explore. Because, as simple as that sounds, there's a giant although that goes with this.
Oh.
And,
here comes the catch.
It's the however, pretty much, hey, easy for Columbo, right? Gathering evidence is actually hard. Withholding your judgment is actually really hard. And now let's start delving into why is that the case? What's preventing us from just rolling like Columbo? We're emotional machines, and if you're thinking about, well, hey, you're making a game, you're making an app for the App Store, or you're making a comic or a song or whatever. You have disciplines, maybe deep disciplines that are guiding so many choices along that. And maybe even in some cases, truly science-based ones. And even in the presence of those science-based disciplines in certain situations, like computer science, you can't stop the fact that you're an emotional being. For example, we all have biases. And ways to misjudge things that we think we're perceiving, specifically cognitive biases and logical fallacies. And I am totally and let's see, an amateur, professional, semi whatever, because when it comes to this, where like I love to delve into the realm and information and be informed by things related to psychology. Yet, these are my interpretations of what I've gathered there. Right, I'm not a psychologist, but my understanding is cognitive bias is essentially a fundamental, like a filter that's just always there. You know, we have ways we perceive the world. Our biases are little distortions in that, and they just lead to some inaccurate judgment on an ongoing basis. Whereas a logical fallacy is like a specific error, and like you could use that characterization of an error to know, like, oh, maybe you'll find a filter that you have, or what have you, or maybe you'll find in some some schools of psychology, like I think the Adlerian school, these are called mistaken beliefs. And while that's the case, this isn't just a fear campaign, right? This is mixed with your useful habits. This is mixed with all the stuff that like you've done and been professional at for years and are super efficient and effective at. Yet that doesn't stand alone. Like you've got these cognitive biases and logical fallacies totally, along for the ride.
Okay, such as?
Yeah. And I do like to pause. I don't want to steamroll over you, Jersey. You've got license interrupt anytime.
Oh, I know. I've got my ammunition locked and loaded. I'm just waiting for the right time to strike.
Nice, like a mongoose. So one particular cognitive bias that I think is fascinating, and there are many, right? The Dunning-Kruger Effect. It's essentially, this has come up actually on the Lean Into Art podcast. It's come up actually on Comics Are Great recently. It's come up in a variety of venues, even in this sort of small world, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's so interesting is that it frames up the situation of, as you're developing skill or knowledge, it's really hard to judge your own extent of your skill. And when you have enough to really put to use for what you're trying to accomplish. So when the Dunning-Kruger effect was being researched, it was actually nicknamed American Idol syndrome. And I haven't watched a ton of American Idol. I've caught a little bit of it over the years. It's been on long enough where I've absorbed it by osmosis or whatever. Right? I know I have a pop culture deficiency, but.
But we've all seen a clip on Facebook or something of one of those people who was trying out for American Idol, and they are just it looks like they've never sung before in their lives. That the concept of melody is alien to them. Yet they finish with a flourish that says, "Look at what I just did. I am amazing."
They're like, that's right.
There's a certain kind of Schadenfreude that people like about that, right? It's like, wow, watch this guy like really tank and not get it that he tanked.
And that perfectly embodies it. How could someone be in that circumstance? And honestly, in a way, again, this isn't the fear campaign aspect, but like all of us are in some form of that circumstance pretty much all the time. And it's the some of those extremes just make the phenomena or the concept that this exists just super obvious. They're like and they actually point out to some interesting complexities in that if you really aren't able to understand your own skill to that extreme, you're probably around a bunch of other people who can't understand your skill to that extreme and or are participating in some way of that self-deception where it's like a social weird deception thing going
Yeah. When I was in high school, I remember having some friends, and I watched them do that to each other. That was weird. Or they're like, "Oh, you're amazing." I'm like, "No, they're not. Why are you telling them that?"
Mm.
Um,
And so, but sometimes we do that because, hey, we just don't want to offend, right?
sure,
Oh, that
sure,
was great, But
yeah,
yeah, and I don't know. I think there's a time when eventually that advocacy would have to fall to the wayside to say, well, I dig your singing. I don't think it's necessarily ready for the global stage,
right.
what have you. So, and this is just
But there's a converse to this too that I found that I didn't know about until I was reading your notes, and I think this is interesting. Is that like as you get more skilled, your estimation of your skills tends to, or if people who are suffering from the Dunning-Kruger effect, that they have a lower estimation of their skills than is actually true.
yeah. So yeah, once you have approached an extreme kind of mastery, you will likely be devaluing it a little bit, or maybe a lot. And
Because of either it is so effortless to me that how could this possibly be difficult for anybody else, or it could be a situation where it's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. But either
exactly.
way, like a mastery of something can also engender a kind of weird humility.
Yeah, because in order to get to that point, you had to have been willing to question it
Yeah,
enough. And so if you're in that habit, you probably, in order to get that strong at it, you probably also got pretty darn strong at the questioning as well. And that's what I'm trying to characterize here by sharing this bias is that it's easy to be at your limits, and it's just worth questioning and explore your reasoning to find more to support or refute what you're considering and how you're judging yourself.
yeah.
And that's all that this is just to be aware of that and to question. Another really significant cognitive bias is sunk cost fallacy, and it's I've heard this characterized in a variety of ways. Again, when I read about this, it makes me excited. Where like I wish I could live a parallel life where I'm also a researcher in the lab, seeing this kind of stuff happen and learning and just being able to share it with the world, because it's essentially how as human beings we don't like to feel loss, and so we have this loss aversion that just that bias. So it's a filter, and it affects and it introduces sort of irrational choices. Like a classic example with sunk cost fallacy is let's say you buy a non-refundable ticket for a concert, and it's let's see, it's I don't know. I don't know if price really frames this very well, but let's say it's $100. You get $100 ticket for a concert, and then later find a ticket that's in a better seat, but it's not free, but then that it costs something. A lot of us would just avoid it, because even though like for not that much more investment, we could be in a far better position to like the positive benefits of that don't seem to weigh in as much as the negative, the loss aspect. So one way to sort of detect this is to think that you're at a decision point on a project, and you've been taking a certain approach, and you know that you're facing a very difficult circumstance, but you're familiar with this current approach, and other choices you're not evaluating them enough because you made it this far. If you're saying that kind of thing, take a step back. That's all this is. Not for your campaign. It's about saying, hopefully, you can find more to back up your reasoning besides just that kind of judgment. Pausing because just making sure that all right. So I have not. So this isn't like some official like Wikipedia cognitive bias thing, but like I find that like my experience biases me, and so hey, Jersey, in a it's tough for you because you can't hide as much. But I'm going to ask you this, and we can explore reframing this question and whatnot, right?
All right.
But so do you look suspiciously at any role in a collaboration or any work products from any role?
Elaborate.
Like in software, this is actually super common. Like, so let's say I'm very suspicious of like budgeting before building a prototype. I'm really suspicious of the high level planning processes that involve a lot of secondary research instead of making a thing to gain your own observations, right? So in software, there's a lot of these situations where, and it gets even further than that, where like you typically build a thing and then you have to somehow get that thing out into the world, and then getting that thing out there in the world is often someone else's role, right?
Yes. And I'll tell you, one of the things that makes my eyebrow cock and I get very suspicious is when somebody leads the discussion on a comics project and with framing it as, and we will make a movie from it. This will be a great platform to make a movie. Or if they talk about productizing it before they've talked about what will actually make the comic into a comic. When the production of the comic is a smaller part or less intrinsic part of a larger idea-making machine. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It's yeah. I mean, so in some ways, like that's why we get experience. We get experience to have these judgments, right? Yeah. They become our heuristics. Yep. And it's not to say that we inherently shouldn't have heuristics, yet it's worth noticing them and make sure they're serving you in the current project and not just they would have served you in a prior project kind of thing.
No, and this is one of the reasons why in a lot of our discussions I will talk about young or beginning cartoonists, and I'll say like, well, they need that experience before they can even decide what the heck they want out of the thing. Because when I say I get suspicious of somebody who leads with the whole talk about movies or products, that's my personal taste and that's my personal worldview, bias, whatever you want to call it. But I'm not saying that they're wrong for doing that. That's a perfectly legitimate reason to make a comic. Just not the reason I want to make comics, but I only knew that once I started making comics.
Exactly. It's easy to have assumptions about the roles. And hold on a second here. My my forwarding macro went nuts. So it's again, like it's that whole, you have this salad of like your experiences that serve you and help you be effective at what you're trying to build and how you're part of a collaboration, yet at the same time you also have these darn cognitive biases and logical fallacies along for the ride. And it's just it's worth knowing they exist to just make sure that they're not the ones running the show, and acknowledging that like essentially we all can have a lack of empathy at times.
Yes. Another comics example that I'll bring to this is that we can think of the life of a comic, going back to bullpen style, just as an example, as a case in point, because this is something where a lot of hands are in the pot. Writing informs the moment choices. Penciling clarifies the moment choices and sets up the composition. Inking clarifies the moment, meaning and tone, focuses ideas. Coloring clarifies the tone and composition. Lettering clarifies the moment choices, tone, and composition. But when you divine all those jobs, and if you don't have a cohesive view of how all these things are interrelating, and especially if there's a linear progression of how this thing is put together, one can feel balkanized and feel like, well, I'm doing the most important thing in the chain after all, and why did this person make this more difficult for me, or why did they not see that this is the better way to do it, when the truth is, and especially you discover this when you do a comic all yourself, is that all these things are completely interrelated. It'd be like saying that the spleen is more important than the liver. to say that any one of those things was more important than the other, right? And so that, and I do think that like I've seen that lack of empathy happen in my own personal projects and when talking amongst friends as well.
And so let's say that let's say framing your experience as like it's a data point. It's not like the only point.
Mm-hmm.
And so why not try to bolster that where you could be right on, right? But even if you are right on, how do you make that relatable? And how do you somehow show empathy to help the project overcome the issue you're concerned about regarding a given role or their particular work product or how they're tackling it, right?
Yeah.
There's an exercise that I think is pretty handy. And this is what we have here on the screen is essentially, it's a doodle, but it could be essentially just 4 boxes. And what this is meant to be is it's an empathy map, which is basically it's 4 lists. And 2 of the lists are things that you can observe. And then 2 of the lists are things that you can infer. Now what you can observe is like, well, what are they saying? Right? Like what is this person in this role? What are they saying about what am I concerned about what they're saying? So just capture that list. What are they saying? Yeah. And then what are they doing? Another list. Capture a list. What do you see them doing? And that gets you away from just only your bias reacting to this. So now that you have these 2 lists, you can come up with another couple of lists. And this is inferring, and it might be totally baloney, might be totally wrong. Yet, I think it's an interesting exercise where, like, if you start to go from what they're saying, what that person in that role is, what are they saying, and what are they doing, and then you go into what are they thinking. You're totally guessing this, right?
Yeah.
But you're trying to empathize. You're trying to understand and infer based on what they're saying and doing. Then also, even harder, what are they feeling, right? Mm. Let's say you do this and you're like at least curious and excited and open-minded enough where you're like, yeah, okay, fine, I'll give this a shot. Totally hate that person in their role or whatever, but anyway, but you just kind of go along with it. So I'm painting a worst-case scenario picture is you go along with it, and at the end of it, you have the basis to come up with questions to reach out to that person, even if they're completely wrong, right? Because inherently your questions are going to show a lot about your role and what you understand, and then and that's just going to be a way for you to start connecting. And that's it. It's a connecting device. And chances are you're not going to be that extremely wrong or that totally off. So it's
and that skill will improve with time. I mean, this is a skill set that I've learned through doing the Comics Are Great show, where I'm interviewing different people all the time, and I have to look at what they've blogged, what they've made, and guess and look at their their body of work to infer a worldview and infer an intent, and then ask them about it on the show. Right.
Honestly, that's a super similar similar approach. Is that like, so is that sort of part of your planning?
Yeah. Well, I've made no bones about this. We've done the LIA Cast on the subject. Is I try to find 3 things that I think they do that nobody else does, or 3 things they do in an extra special way or an interesting way, and then ask them about it with how and why questions. And I specifically designed the show to have a topic that is suited for them. And in order to make a topic that's suited for them, I have to do a lot of research and guesswork as to what I think they could respond to well. And I can only think of a couple of times where I was way off base, where I was like, hey, this is the topic I want to do with you. And they're like, really? But most of the time, I feel like I get pretty close to the mark, where they've even said, Brandon Dayton used these words on the LIA Cast, where he said that I would make a good therapist because I ask probing questions into something about that I detect matters to them a lot.
And it's interesting. It's like it is really similar, because you're describing like a journalistic exercise that I think it's kind of a cool alternate form of an empathy map, because it's almost like it's an honorable interview map.
Yeah.
Something like that. That's pretty awesome.
If we could round back, one of the things you said about Columbo from the start was like that he had like this big, lots of curiosity, and I think that this empathy map is not just an efficient way to do it, but I think it engenders curiosity through practice, and that curiosity is just like, God, it's so crucial to not only learning how to do things better, like improving your skill set, but just improving your interactions with other human beings. Because everybody's had that conversation with somebody where they go like, "Oh, so you're a auto mechanic?" "Yes." "Oh crap, where do I go from here?" What do you like about it? I guess I don't know. What's my line of questioning here, right? If
It's funny. Yeah,
part of
because a lot of times sometimes one of the areas where that exchange really tanks, and I've been someone who does this, where like you'll think of like one of the main emotional things you react to regarding that context, and it's like, well, yeah, I work on cars. Ooh, I hate cars. Ooh, I hate man, I hate changing my oil or whatever. And like you just blurt out one of those things.
Yeah.
It's, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like another side bonus effect of this using this empathy map exercise is it makes you better at small talk, which makes networking a lot better, a lot easier. And when I say small talk, I don't mean insincere small talk. I mean like it makes it to where it gets easier for you to get to know people because you know what questions to ask and how to infer things from what they're saying and what their body language is and where to take the conversation next, right? It makes you more attentive to all those things. Be like Columbo.
Mm-hmm. And a little bonus hypothesis here is that we're all end users for one another's skills. And that's just one of the points of these user-centric disciplines is that now we're characterizing success based on stuff that's not just in our own heads.
Comics example. The writer and the penciler, or let's say the writer and the artist, are in service to one another. The penciler, the artist draws what the writer can't or won't, if the writer is an artist and chooses not to draw this thing, and the writer provides narrative that the artist can't or won't. One of the things that Dan Mishkin says whenever he talks about collaborating, and he's not just blowing smoke because I worked with the man and he does work just like this. He says, "This is what I think needs to happen here. Help me tell that. And call me out when I am way off base on what can and cannot be shown for this thing."
That's awesome.
Yeah.
This is what I think needs to happen here, and help me do that.
And he's very sincere about that, and he's very explicit about his role, even like midstream in the project. He'll remind me that our relationship is that I am helping him make this thing happen, and he is helping me through critique, clarification, tweaking, and so on. It's a very healthy relationship working with Dan, and I highly recommend it to everybody.
that is so awesome. He's nearly infinitely quotable.
He is. He really is. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So because we're all end users and we're for one another's skills, and then we do need to build stuff together. This is another case for saying that your biases get in the way of that. So why not just try to work on them, right? You look like you got something on this one.
No.
Okay.
No. I'm agreeing with you emphatically.
Emphatic nod. So, noticing that doesn't mean it's instant or easily accomplished. And in fact, it's essentially introducing habits of science. Because by practicing habits of science, we can grow our own Columbo super skills, because we're not just leaving things as they are and everything's an assumption. We're going to notice our biases when we can. We're going to notice our cognitive, our logical fallacies, and not just notice them, but then try to critique to change them. And that practice isn't just awesome for you. It's awesome for every single person that you work with, because inherently, because you're working with them and you're triangulating your thoughts and you're getting their critique, you've now included their rationale in your own, and it makes it stronger. And now you're a team instead of a collection of disciplines. So teams are one of the big ways to grow and improve through this. It's we're not working alone here. And even if you are working alone, you're likely not just making a thing and then buying it off yourself. Like, there's some way to involve a wider perception, net participation thing to embrace the idea that we're social creatures and that our ideas don't stand alone. Even Columbo doesn't work alone. If you notice, like, he has an assistant that'll be like, oh, he's, running lab things and doing stuff in the background. Maybe pulling a little prankster trick stuff near the end of the episode to, cause the bad person to trip up or what have you. But it's a social thing, and teams help us practice things like the skills that we're accustomed to and that we embrace and use, our the sort of emergent culture from how we're doing what we're doing together, and then the tools that we use, which I like to combine skills and tools actually too, because when you do that and you try to talk about it, you're in this role of advocacy. And if you have essentially a writer who's curious about the sort of the techniques of drawing, or if you have a penciler who's really curious about how inking works, or if you have an inker who's really curious, like anywhere, draw those different, connect the dots on whatever project, or a bass player who wants to know more about vocals or whatever.
Yep.
It's that that curiosity, if we have it, now you can easily become an audience to then listen to that other person, advocate for their discipline and share it. Common forms that you'll run into this stuff, especially in software, is like code advocacy, code literacy, and the same for design advocacy, design literacy. And I would imagine in comics, there's probably especially if you're in the digital realm, you probably run across articles that are of that nature, where someone's talking about Gestalt principles and stuff, right? Well, that's more or less like, hey, I want you to have this tool too. And even if you're not mastering it yet, it exists. And hopefully we can have a better conversation about it.
Oh, yeah. And when we were working on the Warren Commission report, and I was employing this very modular style of constructing pages so that we could move things around a lot, Dan was very attentive to me explaining to him how it worked so he would understand what could and couldn't be done. He would say to me, he's like, I don't want to be the guy who says, well, you got Photoshop, so you can just do magic, so make magic happen. He said, I want to understand what are the limits of what we can do, and though I'm very impressed by these limits, like how far out the limits are, it's like I want to know what their edges are so I'm not asking for something unreasonable.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
I think in the next version of this, I'm going to have some Dan Mishkin quotes. I'm not kidding either. Seriously, like, that is such a like an inclusive, informed, and pragmatic perspective.
Yeah, because he wanted to make sure that the book got done on time, right? This wasn't just about him being a gentle soul. This is also about him knowing, like, how do I communicate with you as effectively as possible, right?
And the it's so that it's like there really is a practical point to doing a to exploring how do you approach these collaborative projects in a way that helps with a easier, more accessible shared understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, that's the most important thing a team can have, is a shared purpose. And that even goes, this is where the definition of team can get squishy, right? Because team on a book, right? you are likely a core team making a thing, or like if you're someone making an application or a game, there's likely a marketplace where that has to go. There's likely some kind of distribution, packaging, marketing, whatever. That, guess what? Guess who's on the team now? But you're all sharing this purpose event, and all of a sudden, like, the boundary goes further and further, and these habits extend anywhere along with that sort of change in perspective. So, as far as like, how does this work? Great. So you're doing some advocacy, and you're understanding a little bit more about one another. But then again, how are we knowing that we're not all just, just somehow not really understanding one another, what have you? You got to have a feedback loop. You've got to be looking for just a little bit of evidence. Like, did we get this to where it needs to be, and not just assume it. And I think the most, in some ways, the most challenging, but yet also the most powerful, beneficial, reusable, flexible thing that you can help your team do is critique. And if you're critiquing one another, you have a shot to make your project better all the time, every day, whether you're still planning it or you're just testing out your ideas, doing some prototype pages for your comic. Like, well, I don't know, like, what if we did a painterly style? Does that seem to be going along, does that seem to get us closer to what we want to accomplish? And why? Go ahead.
It encourages an environment where people are prepared to be receptive to other people's ideas, right? It's not just about giving agency to everybody in the group to like offer their thoughts to how to get to the common goal, but also to prepare everybody to say, we are here to listen as well, right? That's a big one. That's a big, big, big one.
Exactly. That is one of the. It's like the prerequisite for the critique to exist is that people are listening to one another.
Yeah.
And it's like it is probably. I haven't diagrammed it, but I think that's got to be at least one of the major reasons why now that you're listening to one another, you have a chance to improve what you're making together and what each individual is doing.
Yep.
And how do you okay, great. So let's say we buy into critique, but then what? So are we just sort of just doing drive-by feedback? Are we doing, I like it, thumbs up, high fives? What do we do? Like, so Jersey, what does good critique look like to you?
Good critique looks like it's asking me what I wanted to achieve with this thing, what steps did I take to achieve with this thing, and then a reflection from somebody else as to what my intent and my effort is coming across as to them.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody actually asking or looking for what I set out to do in the context of what I actually did, right? So somebody just looking at my work and saying, like, you got a lot of talking animals in your comic. I don't like talking animals. That's not a useful critique to me.
Okay, so, or does it look like like you show someone a page and they stand there going, and then they go like, fail, walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a drive-by comment. This sucks. You suck for making it. Yeah.
Or even if it's like, oh, I love it. And
yes. Radical.
Is that critique?
That is not a critique. Radical makes me feel good that I made you happy, but it doesn't provide me with any data that I can use for the next thing.
Yeah. And it's really a kind of it's a deeper investment to try to find those nuances of like, oh, okay, fine. So you had the radical reaction. Great. And and this is a thing where, like, if you're on a team where that's safe to do, then you're a pretty badass team. You're able to really get some interesting things done.
Yes.
And
depending on how long you work together and like what the subtle nuances of when you say radical, yes, that can be a shorthand, sure. But
absolutely, people, we optimize, sure. Yet, that probably emerged eventually as refinement and comfort.
Yep.
Set in, but hopefully not too comfortable, right? And that's where you'd have the trust in place to know, like, well, if Dan Mishkin said radical, probably that embodied more of a whole critique than if, like, someone you just met said radical.
Yeah.
And again, anyway. That doesn't sound like me picking on Dan Mishkin, I hope. So
No.
Good. So
This is also a topic I should mention that we talked about this extensively with Brandon Dayton and Dave Roman on Lean Into Art, episode 94, which we will link to in the show notes.
That was a really fun conversation about critique, actually.
Yeah, it was.
I want to go back and listen to that one again, too. And let's see. Good. I suppose maybe there is like an empathy map for critique, because I'm thinking, good critique looks like there are people you could observe, actually, some exchange of ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that would be, out of what people are saying and doing, and how they're participating in that. And I would I propose that if you're making an environment where you can have those hard conversations, that likely there's these side attributes that you could observe. Like, there seems like people are willing to be vulnerable with one another. Seems like those people are really open. It seems like this must be a really safe place, right? There's a lot of trust here, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think that can be very observable. So that's, just to dive honestly, I think you covered this, Jersey, by mentioning episode 94 when we critique with Dave Roman and Brandon Dayton.
Yeah.
But there's a series of, and you framed it up actually too when I asked you, like, what does it look like, and then reflexively, if you're familiar with good critique, that there's like some kind of context being built for, like, I don't know, let's say you fixed up a muscle car, Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's never going to happen, but let's suppose.
Who knows? And you're like, look at this muscle car, and I'm like, wow, what was it like before? What were you trying to do with it? And like, let's say you were asking for my feedback on this or my critique, and I would need to. I just wouldn't be in a position to give good critique until I learned more.
Right.
And so inherently, you have to get on the same page, and at the very least, if you're not totally sharing that purpose, like you're critiquing someone else's work where you're not really on their team directly, whatever, you got to learn more about it.
Yeah.
And then figure out, well, why, and why do you both all over the place, like, why do you frame it that way? What goals do you have? How did you go about it, and how did you think, like, and so why did you think going about it in that way would bring you to this result, whatever? So then also, it's almost like you have their full rationale framework, and then you have a chance to say, well, wow, what you've presented me here is consistent with that, and I also have these other reactions. Then I can ask myself why, or you can ask me why, because it looks like a conversation. It's not a one-way thing.
Right. So do we want to talk about bad critique?
Yeah. So I asked you about good critique. What does bad critique look like?
Your music is bad, and you should feel bad.
That's Zoidberg.
Yes, it is.
When
Fry plays the holophoner.
The holophoner. Oh my god, that's a weakness of mine, is Futurama. So it's I guess probably everyone in listening to this has received bad critique at some point.
And bad critique isn't just negative. Bad critique can also just be not helpful. Like, oh, that's beautiful. I like it. There's an I Love Lucy joke, and I was reminded of it recently through the Wait, Don't Tell Me show on NPR, where Lucy is at a party with some friends, and then a woman comes in with this god-awful hat, and she's like, well, what do you think? And Lucy says, well, if that's the hat you want, you got a good one, which is a joke about getting out of an uncomfortable situation where you have to judge somebody or you don't want to. But that's not helpful critique, right?
Yeah, Minnesota's full of it. That's very interesting. This is an interesting meal.
Oh my gosh. They do it in Michigan too.
They do?
Wow. Yes.
These people. All right. I love that distinction, Jersey, because you're like, oh yeah, it's not, may not be bad, it's just not helpful.
Yeah.
So totally that's the key distinction, because so what else can we think about bad critique? Is it, I suppose
bad critique is also responding emotionally and from a bias and not even trying to understand the context of the thing that they're evaluating. Oh, look at this painting. Oh, it's got a lot of green on it. I really don't like the color green, right? It's responding viscerally to a thing for reasons without any context of the thing that you're evaluating, right?
It's that kind of lack of investment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Disengagement is bad critique.
I also think totally falling into motivated reasoning can be bad critique too.
Explain.
So motivated reasoning meaning feeling really justified in shutting someone down, kind of thing.
I will never understand that worldview.
Yeah, well, I've done it, man. And that's one of the things where I try to connect with bad critique by providing a personal example here. And this isn't. Let's see. I'm trying to think if it's happened in other situations, but the example that I have easily at hand is thinking about kind of earlier in my career. I was I'm just really fortunate, and for a lot of different things, because I was part of proposing and then getting funding and then being able to build and design and architect kind of a platform I was really proud of. And it was a combination of it made no, I don't even want to compliment it that much. Imagine a more primitive WordPress, right?
Okay.
But like in the 90s, way before WordPress, right? And so this framework helped people in the business I worked for across dozens of departments make hundreds of sites and serve like tens of thousands of users, and they could get to market super fast, and they looked fairly consistent, right? And so I had a lot of justification for being pretty satisfied about it. Yet when there's situations where I think people have come to me with pretty decent rationale looking back at it for reasons to change it and reasons to evolve or get more complex, right? And I think I was using motivated reasoning when I would essentially do dodge it and provide pushback and try to make them accountable for the faults of what I was offering, and it's be able to not embrace the feedback and think, well, how could we do this, and why do you, and dig deeper, right? And I think it's that kind of it doesn't always come from this, but I think a really good source of it would be pride, which can allow us to really justify stuff.
Yeah, and there's a romanticism around the notion of being a man with a vision. The man with a vision, and he didn't let anybody stop him from achieving his vision, right? Like steamrolling over everybody.
Exactly. Steaming mad at dirt. I would I like the Rug Doctor and Steve Jobs combined. I did not anyway.
The Rug Doctor.
No. I do think like, so you build a thing and you're offering a service, and it's easy to notice if someone's offering a client wants you to go somewhere that you just inherently know will cost you something.
Yeah.
And you're not, but instead of it, and so here's where I'm holding myself accountable for this, is that it's not that I should have inherently just gone in that other direction, but I should have gone further into the conversation to understand more about it.
Yes.
And
okay.
then
I'm guilty of this too. Now that you
and
mention
share
it.
the darn share my constraints better, right?
Yes.
And I don't know. There you go.
No,
So it's like
you're
learning
right.
that lesson, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Sharing your constraints is, oh my God, that is such a big one. And doing it well. So as not to say like, not to be aggrieved about it. Like, oh, here you go again, trying to pile more stuff on me. I only got so, but to say like, well, I see what you're trying to do here. Here's what I can do. Here's 3 options of what we can do, given the time and the resources and the bandwidth. And here's some ways in which it will change the nature of the project if we go down any one of these paths. Here's some foreseeable outcomes that I predict, right? Ugh.
Well, and inherently at that point, you are framing things up and providing a way to have a participation in the decision.
Yes.
And again, like maybe shaped by the constraints. Maybe the constraints in the raw aren't tangible enough, and so like you're describing more. So make them more tangible. Like here's some scenarios of like, well, if we chose these different routes, let's think of ways to cope with these, limitations of like maybe time or space on a page or the certain layout or other design conventions chosen for a project or whatever.
Well, I mean, an oversimplified way of putting it is that it's not about you, right? When you're sharing your constraints, it's not just to say, look, I only got so many hands. It's to make the whole team aware of what our resources are at our disposal.
I like that distinction. Just taking a note. Since I'm sharing my screen, you can't see that the classic. There, I'm looking down, scribbling constantly. So,
so what do you mean by can we jump to swoop and poop? Because I'm curious about this one, this particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just as good critique is a conversation. I could characterize bad critique as an announcement, or an assumption dump.
By the way, Rob, just like this is totally like meta discussion about the talk itself.
Mm-hmm.
Great idea, like going all this like intellectually stimulating stuff and then throwing in a cartoon of a turd. Always good. It works. It works with every audience on every level. And the fact that it says swoop and poop, that works. But the fact that you drew the poop, hats off. That's good presentation skills.
Well, and there's the bird providing it as well. So yeah, it's not to point out every single detail, but it's the and so swoop and poop isn't a phrase that I invented. It's I recall encountering it from Jared Spool's podcast, and the Spoolcast, where he shares stories that are sort of these common situations you find yourself in. You've got a client or different stakeholders, or you're just on a team, and then the highest ranked or highest paid person on the team or whatever has very influential. Like this is the most difficult swoop and poop to deal with. Essentially, is the kind of like what I think helped where he invented the phrases. I'm guessing where it's the if the highest paid person goes, I totally hate red, and jagged buttons are awesome. And that's it. So, and see you Friday or whatever, right? So it's not inclusive, and it's just blurting stuff out. And maybe those reactions could lead to great insights, but inherently there's some providers of that don't participate in an extended conversation.
I think a lot of us have experienced this situation. Otherwise, movies like Office Space would not exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Or comic strips like Dilbert.
Yeah,
right?
And there was a time like I couldn't watch Dilbert because it was too much like my day job.
Too painful, yeah.
Too painful. It's not funny. Stop it. And okay, so how do teams? Teams don't just have to start day one. Guess what? Everything we do, we're critiquing all the time. We're just big old critique machines in a critique zone and drinking critique Kool-Aid all day long. You can start pretty approachably by just having like a reflection ritual where maybe you get a draft done, or maybe it's like this is where, like, if you do something with a recurrence to it, you just at the end at one of those bookends, you slip in one more step where you do some reflection, and where you start to just start to build and endorse and celebrate the habits of, hey, how did that go? Why do we think it went that way? And then get everyone to participate as best you can. And that can start to try to make it an everyday thing, because it's like, it seems like when, like, I don't know, I noticed this, Jersey, what do you think? When you facilitate workshops, are people in a situation where they're willing to try stuff they wouldn't normally try?
Not always at the outset. By the end of the workshop, then yes, they are. So, yeah, why do you ask? What are you driving at here?
Well, let's say, like if critique is a very divisive thing and it's not easy, then way to make a special event to start to build that up and start small and all that kind of stuff. Even if it is, maybe even like you do a reflection workshop for what was currently completed.
Mm-hmm. No, and one of the ways that I try to, or I do my best to engender a culture of openness and sharing amongst my kids' students is these kids don't know each other. They don't go to school together. They're all from different schools coming to my class. And so I will, when I see a kid struggling with something, they're like, I don't know how to draw hands, or I don't know how to draw this. I'll say, well, I noticed that Shayna over there is really good at drawing hands. Shayna, do you think you can give him a hand? Do you think you can, like, help out over here? And I'll empower the students to teach each other, and then I'll see those teaching moments happen naturally amongst them by the 8th week of the class, right? And so it just becomes a natural inflection of what they do. So yes, these little things, you can slowly
introduce a new habit, right?
Introduce a new habit, yes.
And
this is art sound off, dude. This is like it's like today when I was doing my Thunder Punch Daily, I was like, all right, what did I do today? And then, like, a part of my brain fired off and said, like, well, it's a little bit same old, right? That's an interesting conversation. And so, like, that's not enough. Come on, really think hard what you did today and reflect on it. It is a habit. It's a skill you can build. It's a learnable skill.
And by getting it started, you can. It's funny you mentioned teaching too, because in some ways, whoever is there more comfortable with it can be modeling, and then a part of the team culture. And really, what is culture? But how could you observe culture? Think about, well, what is the team celebrating? So, if you celebrate learning by that kind of by reflection, if you celebrate critique by doing by doing it and recognizing one another for doing it well, you're inherently getting into, like, the teaching angle of it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
So now we get to your manifesto.
Oh, manifestos, dude. Such a weird word. Because I really like this. So, all right, if I'm there, I was not expecting one day that I was going to be in a situation where I wanted to write a manifesto, and then something happened, then I did. And then that's just kind of a weird transition. And it started out with I have had the honor to work with some really interesting and smart people in a lot of different contexts, but also, like, where I'm currently at, I had the urge to just start asking around of, like, I went into, in a way, Columbo mode, or a reporter, and I started asking people, like, what goes into making a great thing, or what causes something to be really well designed, or what is a really healthy system? How should that work? How do teams make these things happen? And I just started asking all these kinds of questions to the people I was working with. And what came of it was some really interesting answers in philosophy that I suddenly started to, as I thought I was going to write some kind of article about it, but then it turned into like a proclamation of principles. And then once you make that public, that's a manifesto. Especially if you make that public and ask others to participate, then it's an invitation, part proclamation. It's got to be public. There you go. So, a little pinch of salt. There you got a manifesto. And and in this case, It's the Make, Share, Collaborate Manifesto. I don't have to, dive in and read it all. If you're curious about it, you can check it out at bit.ly, so bit.ly/makeshare. And the key cornerstone principles are make, hold yourself accountable for expressing concepts and working things. Share, hold yourself accountable to frequent research, critique, and feedback. And collaborate, hold yourself accountable to understand and communicate what you seek to make. And then, a few other details in there. And then, if you're really into it, by all means, go ahead and offer me feedback on it. That'd be cool. I'd happily evolve it and make it better. Or feel free to sign it. And, join the others, where it's like now it becomes your proclamation too. So if that's, not your cup of tea, totally cool. I haven't found myself signing too many manifestos I run into. But
you're in the habit?
Upon occasion, I'll sign a manifesto.
Well, I signed this one. This describes pretty accurately the ethos behind Lead Into Art as well. So, no arguments from me.
It's influenced by working with you as well, Jersey, and it's how does that work? And it's something that occurred to me through it, and it's in the document too, that I just want to make sure I do share in case you don't happen to have a chance to check it out, is a shift in perspective, a reframing. And when we provide service to one another, when we're essentially end users for one another's disciplines, and even when we're providing a service for a client, instead of consider reframing the for to with. And I think that creates a leveling foundation where now critique can happen hopefully everywhere. Hopefully at every single connection in the collaboration, even to the client.
That's good.
So try working with instead of for.
Well, that was a great talk, Rob. Thanks so much for sharing all these ideas with us. And, sharing the slide deck.
Exactly. Well, I assume you're busy. You got to get back to your day. And I'm just got to check. I have to check my pockets for my keys. Maybe I'm going to scrunch my hair because, I'm basically role-playing Columbo at this point. And, I'd be heading for the door if this were a Columbo episode. But then I'd spin around and say, just one more question. And that question is, why? Doesn't sound like much.
Why what?
Why is a powerful thing. And why is, in this case, well, why would you do this, right? And then also, just endorsing why. So there's, a little bit of a feedback loop of whys here, right? But, why is an incredible thing? Because why is like a magnet that sticks to how people see what they are trying to solve and how they're trying to solve it. Because all of a sudden, why is like, well, hey, where's your rationale? I can't find it. Why? Bonk, stuck to it, right? Go ahead, answer it. Out will come your rationale. And, and it's this other, this other quality about that, because when you're providing your rationale, you're getting out of the world of the implicit, and you're more accountable. And because you have something now shared, it's not just an order or like a command. It's like, well, why? What's behind that, right?
Yep.
It's now something that everyone in the collaboration can observe. And if everyone is asking why, then all of a sudden, now we have your intent opened up, and we have everyone else's intent opened up, and then now we can find out how well we're jiving up, or if we need to change something, or and then what led us to be on a different page if we're not quite, really thinking that all the goals of the project are the same. Like maybe the penciler is saying like, well, the goal of the project is to make sure we have the greatest count of. I feel bad. I'm going to pick on '90s comics. The greatest count of pockets and zippers and chains, known to man, and I love Ghost Rider, but whatever.
Right.
Anyway,
But that was a theme of the time. Yeah.
Oh boy, and honestly, so someone might have said, you know what, that's silly, and then someone could have said, you know what sold really well last month? Spawn. You know what people like to see? Freaking zippers and pockets and capes and all of a sudden, so maybe they could have backed it up instead of just leaving it there like an assumption. And inherently, again, now you're behaving more like a team because you're able to exchange those ideas across and connect the roles instead of just blindly or just avoiding that connection. You can do it. It even goes further where it's not just questioning those different collaborative choices, but even the method you're using to accomplish that thing. Maybe bullpen isn't the right approach for the given comic.
Yep.
Or maybe,
or for a different team of collaborators, right? I've worked full script bullpen style with some writers, and then with other writers, in the way we work, we discovered that it works really. It happens more effortlessly and fluidly when we work plot style, where I just give you a page by page breakdown. You work off a thumbnail thing like that, give it back to me, and then I script it from that. Yeah, and that's heuristics, that's trial and error, that's just working together and gaining experience, but always asking each other through reflection. Why did this work this way and not that way? That's the culture of my classrooms. I tell my students, there's no right or wrong answer, but you got to tell me why. Saying, I don't know just because is not an answer. That is unacceptable. But if you can defend your decisions and your observations, then we're headed someplace.
It becomes a tool that you can use too. It's not just the accountability is there to point a finger at you. It's now that just as that rationale is sitting there for everyone else, it may be really handy, it may become like a new heuristic that you could use in the future. And it's just by let's see. So here I have a scenario. Let's play with this and this is the whole this presentation is mostly tuned toward software development and whatever, but really does apply to collaboration in general. Let's think about a scenario where if you have collaborators that start to ask each other and themselves, what are they intending and why, and what does that lead to, basically. Mm-hmm. Let's say that I'm trying to turn this into comics, but I'm spinning my wheels a little bit here. But what so it'd have to be so let's say that this is a recurring comic. Maybe it is. We could expand this example here, but is it maybe it's a webcomic? And why are we starting to lose recurring readers or something, right? Mm-hmm. Or why are we not gaining more recurring readers, even though we have an ad campaign or whatever? And so then you're going to have people on the project maybe start to try to puzzle that out.
Yeah.
How does asking themselves what are they intending and why help, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can answer that from my own personal experience. Is that when I was doing the front as an online comic, I originally thought it was for a certain audience. I thought it was going to be a boys comic for guys who like superheroes with comedy in it. And then when I found out that, oh my gosh, I got a whole bunch of female readers, and the ones who interact with the comic the most are female. And it made me say, okay, what are they responding to? What can I observe here? What are the things that they're reacting to? And what does that teach me about what I'm doing intentionally and unintentionally? And how can I take that to my next project to better service those readers?
That's really interesting. So did you, in your next project, find a way to let's see, not that you had to do that sooner or whatever, but then did that just, in a way, but did it become like a heuristic where it's important to sort of tune in to that?
It was a long process of teaching me that, and the audience did this for me. They taught me that I'm at my best when I'm drawing cute things, doing awesome action sequences. I did not know that in 2003 when I started doing the front. When I did the front, I thought, this is me at concert pitch. This is me doing what I do best, which is like explosions, debris, awesome action sequences, and ham-fisted comedy. Like people falling on their butts, people making crazy screwed up faces, and then lots of action. People didn't respond to all those things, but they did respond to is the awesome action sequences with cute things in it. And so not every project I experimented with that to see like, okay, well, what are the cute things that they like? And this isn't me just saying like, well, I'm focus grouping everything and just doing whatever the audience wants. It's me following my own vision, but tailoring and tweaking, saying like, well, okay, I'm going to do equalizers of the divide now for sugary cereals. I'm going to introduce this robot bear because a robot bear would be cute because I love bears and bears are awful cute. Well, let's see if I can make this grumpy, gruff old robot bear. People didn't respond to him all that much. Okay, well, I know that didn't work. So let's look at what I could iterate on for the next thing to where I landed to where I am now with Boulder and Fleet, where it's pure animals and people clothes doing people things.
And this has happened a few times where like you're making such the perfect transition. I had to advance the slide.
Well,
so
please do.
I'm glad that you're completing completing the whole thought, because the this questioning is useful when you're collaborating, yet it's also a habit. And this is the sort of the scientific style creative habit that I think is embodied by a few simple questions. Why am I doing this? And is there evidence to support my rationale? So I need to step outside, get a little bit more perspective, and keep on going. It's just a healthy check-in.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what you're describing, that natural process of that discovery, and you can be in the midst of something that's discoverable and not notice it. And what you're describing is that you are noticing it. And that's I think that in how you described works, and also just considering those kind of questions, that now by building up that individual habit, you're going to like be able to benefit as a team as well, like how we described let's see, the trade-offs involved in like, well, what are we trying to accomplish with this project? In a way, so like lean into art. Let's do one of those. Like, well, we used to do a weekly podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had sort of based on our various interests and commitments and whatnot. It like was hard to keep evolving lean into art because it was sort of at max capacity in a way.
Yeah.
Based on the format of the podcasts and how we liked that and didn't want to get rid of it and all this.
There was no time to reflect on what we just did because we were just trying to catch up to the next one. Right?
That's a super good point. Like we added reflection by going bi-weekly.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we then added a bunch of other things, but like those didn't have the same cost individually. Right. So yeah. And that's that kind of question. It lets us, make an informed trade-off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to know the cost and not be approaching things with kind of an we'll do it at any cost mentality. To say, oh gosh, we're going to do all the things we listed and more just because. But and I say that because I've had that kind of self-assumption pile on
me too. Me too. I'm totally guilty of that.
So just to mention a few resources that I think that help with this and help sort of nourish and create a nice info stream along these kinds of habits, right? Predictably Irrational is a really good book, where that's going to help you get some interesting perspective on loss aversion. Creative Confidence is a really good book that I think points out how people can have this sort of creative mindset mixed with a scientific mindset and just do some evidence-based design. It's another way to look at it. The Stanford D School if you're just curious to learn about like a few different polished, interesting approaches to user experience, and look at, like, they have a really cool guide on how to use and make an empathy map. They have a lot, like, tons of good resources for that stuff. The good old baloney detection kit by Carl Sagan. There's different articles that pull this out as it, and I've noticed it like quoted. I think it's from his book, The Demon Haunted World, which I've not read.
Oh yeah, I remember that. I read that like 15 years ago. That's a great book.
And that's awesome. And I need to get read that whole book. But the You're Not So Smart podcast is pretty awesome. I love it. It's basically David McRaney. He's a psychologist, and he is exploring and helping advocate for strategies to deal with self-delusion. And then there is, if you're really into sort of the another great UX resource, the Lean UX book, and then by Jeff Godelf, and of course, any episode of Columbo, because Columbo embodies all these habits. Yeah, I mean, he inspired this whole topic, in my opinion. But of course, if Columbo isn't your thing, there's other detective heroes as well that exhibit similar talents. Veronica Mars, Sherlock Holmes, Batman
Monk
from the animated series, Monk. Oh, I haven't watched Monk.
Oh, I think you'd dig it. I think you would.
Cool. I'll have to check that out. Yeah, a lot of. Then this is like scratching the surface. There's tons of awesome resources on this stuff, because I'm asking, myself and all of us to, be Columbos. Flocks and flocks of Columbos making better stuff. And that's all.
Oh man, that was awesome, Rob.
Thanks, man.
So if anybody wants to follow up with you on this, for if they want to invite you to come talk to their college or their school or their organization, where should they reach out to you about this?
Best place to do that, I think, is my email, which is rob.stenzinger@stenzingersoftware.com. And Twitter's fine too. We can always start the chat there, where I'm just at Rob Stenzinger.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of this one, Rob. And man, what talk about a packed episode. So at this point, I will say, if you guys enjoyed this talk, if you enjoyed this discussion, great way that you could thank us for it is to go to our Patreon page at patreon.com/leanintoart, and you could just chip in $1 a month, and there's extra stuff there. There's the extra leans we do, and there's all those monthly or daily journal podcasts we've been posting to the Patreon site. But if you don't want to tip us for the show, great way you can do it for free to give us a pat on the back is to go to iTunes, give the show a star review, however many stars you think the show deserves. You don't even have to write a review, but if you do write a review, we really appreciate that. That helps more people find the show. If you're watching this on YouTube, giving the video a thumbs up helps more people find the show as well. So, did I miss anything, Rob?
No, that covers it. Basically, we really appreciate when you guys take a minute and do some advocacy for what we're doing here, because that's our primary exchange, is your time and attention, and we make a thing.
That's great. A great way of putting it. Great way of framing it up. You're always so good at framing things, Rob. All right. Well, we will be back in 2 weeks with another show, and it will probably be something about reflecting on the Art Sound Off Challenge. And until then, I have been Jersey Drost of leanintoart.com and Jersey on Twitter.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Twitter.
Okay. Bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
All right, I'm going to kill the stream. So thank you, everybody, for hanging out with us tonight. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.